Thanks, Steffi. I'm delighted to be here. I'm an optimist, too. I mean, historically, you should be one because the arc of history has been a positive one. The guy who cleans this building, the janitor, has a way better life than the richest nobility all across Europe 150 years ago. He's going to live longer. He's got a better diet. He's going to travel. He's more educated. He's got antibiotics. He's vaccinated against horrific diseases. He has sewage and clean water. And he's not going to die of syphilis. The arc of history has been a positive one. But when it comes to the future, I'm of the view that the future is not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. And we have much to do to achieve a new future. And I'd like to begin by telling you a humbling story. Some of you may remember, it was back in '94, I wrote The Digital Economy, and they say it was the first bestseller about the web and business. And I had to write an anniversary edition 20 years later, and I had to reflect on what had occurred over the last 20 years and think about where we're going. And when it came to technology, first, I came to the following conclusion, that we've been through this first era of the internet and the digital age, where we had mainframes, minis, PCs, the internet, the web, social media, mobile web, the cloud, big data. And now we're entering a second era where technology infuses itself into everything, where we have technology that does things that it wasn't programmed to do, machine learning and AI, where we have the physical world, trillions of inert objects becoming smart and interconnected, not only communicating, but doing transactions, where we have vehicles that drive themselves, creating a virtual mass transit system. Subways are €1.5 billion a mile, but we could have a virtual terrestrial mass transit system where accidents don't occur and all kinds of other good things happen. And I also came to the conclusion, which some of you know, that the underlying technology for this second era was the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies, blockchain. I know it's not the most sonorous word in the world, but to me this is the second era of the internet. We've had an internet of information for 40 years, but if I send you information, if I send you this deck, I'm actually not sending you the information, I'm sending you a copy. I retain the original. Same with a website or an email. When it comes to assets, the things that really manage in an economy, money, stocks, securities, intellectual property, carbon credits, loyalty points, our identities, contracts, cultural assets like art, music, votes. A vote's an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. Copying those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity, and if I send you €1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So this problem, the double spend problem of cryptographers have called it for many years, was solved in 2008 by an anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto. And blockchain has now become the new platform for this global economy, or will be. It's a new operating system. It's the internet of value, where anything of value, from money to stocks to music to votes, can be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. And trust is not achieved by banks or governments or credit card companies or social media companies. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code. This is also a more secure platform, and we need that going forward. Now, I had a great analogy on why I thought this platform was more secure. But late-night TV host John Oliver did a whole show on blockchain, and he had some fun with my analogy. So I'm not going to use it anymore, but I'll just show you what he said.
Complicated process the network uses to verify records. It is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
I still think it's a good analogy. But a more humbling part of this story was that the book was very upbeat about the internet. The old media is centralized, it's one way, it's one to many, carries the messages of powerful owners. The new medium is distributed, it's one to one, it's many to many. Users are active, it has this awesome neutrality. It will be what we want it to be. Except, I had this little section called the dark side of 7 awful things that could happen, having to do with privacy, a bifurcation of wealth, structural unemployment, a fragmentation of social discourse, and a bunch of other things. Every one of them happened. So I came to the conclusion, and I'm going to share it with you today in the next 15 minutes, that we're going to need a new social contract for the digital age. That's what's to be done. When we went from the agrarian age to the industrial age, we built a social contract between government, civil society, the private sector. We figured out people are going to need to be educated. We created the public education system. We needed literacy. Created a law. You have to go to school. It's against the law to not go to school. We figured out that people who live in the city, we're going to need a social safety net. We figured out we're going to have to fund all of this stuff. We created income tax. We figured out you can't have one oil company owning all the oil. Created anti-monopoly legislation. We figured out that if you're going to be a publicly traded company, maybe you ought to tell your customers something once a year. The SEC Act of 1934. There were dozens of elements that constituted a contract in society. I don't think we've done any of that today. So I've taken the modest little step of trying to draft one, and I've put it up as a dartboard. And all of you have or will receive an email with a copy of that. It's significant. It's almost the size of a book. And we're having a discussion online. What do you think? There are 9 big issues. Today, I've got time to mention 4 of them. Let me do that. Number 1, in the book I said, it's possible that some big powerful forces will capture our data and we'll lose our privacy in an irrevocable way. Well, check. Before capitalism, we had a system called feudalism all around the world. You weren't paid as a laborer, you worked the land. You grew all this vegetables, or these vegetables and stuff, and then the landlord expropriated them and you were left with a little bit. Well, today the new asset class, it's not vegetables, it's data. Biggest, most powerful, important asset class ever. And you, everybody in this room, you create this data, but it's expropriated by the new digital landlords and you're left with a couple of cabbages. And that means that you can't use the data to plan your life. You can't monetize it. We now have this situation where there's the most powerful and richest companies in the history of the world have been created on this data, and there's a bifurcation of wealth, and your privacy is being undermined. Now, I give talks all the time. Sometimes people say to me, come on, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. I think that's foolish. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And these are our identities. We need to get our identities back so that we can manage them responsibly and use this data to benefit us. So how could that be done? Well, welcome to the new sovereign identity, a black box on a blockchain. Projects underway to create this. You are going to own your own data. So when I leave my hospital in Toronto after an X-ray, my radiology report is already in my identity. Now right now this is on a traditional database, but it's moving to a blockchain. That thing's going to be portable, and I can move it around with me. And that's great, because it means the virtual me is going to be owned by me. Right now, the virtual you knows more about you than you do, because you can't remember what X-ray you had a year ago, or what diagnosis you had, or what you got on a test score, or what you bought, or what you said, or what your exact location was, or what your heart rate was. But the virtual you is not owned by you, it's owned by others. We can get our identities back and have a self-sovereign identity that moves around with us. This will disrupt the big incumbents, unless they're smart and embrace this technology, which they should, and create a new business model. It's possible to solve this problem, and I start here because it's all about the human and the individual owning our identity. We can't go forward and have a positive, free, fair, and just society unless we own our identities. Number two, I said, I'm a big believer in Schumpeter and creative destruction. And technology comes in, it wipes out old industries, but it generates new stuff. And that's what's so awesome about capitalism. It kind of happened and has been happening pretty much up until very recently. But the reason that there's a big rust belt in the United States that brought Donald Trump to power was not because of Mexicans or outsourcing or Canadians, was because of technology. And now get ready. We have a new wave of this fourth industrial age, or the second era of the digital age, that's sweeping in. 48 of 50 states in the United States, the #1 job type for men is truck driver. I think that's gone, not in 50 years, in a decade. 15 max. #1 job type for women is cashier. Gone. And it's not just blue-collar work. It's like computers could diagnose people better than doctors, and they can dispense pharmaceuticals better than druggists, and they can analyze X-rays better than radiologists. Get ready for massive structural relocation. Now, what are we going to do about this? Well, wealth is being created. We have this crazy situation today where we have growing wealth but declining prosperity. The economy is growing and the middle class is getting smaller. How can this be? And how are we going to fix that if people don't have jobs? Well, I think there's some solutions here. What do you think? Come on to the discussion and talk about it. One is, there's lots to do. If there aren't jobs, but there's lots to do, we need to find new ways of funding what needs to be done. Through philanthropy, through civil society, through creating a new halcyon day of entrepreneurship, through the state, if necessary, so that we can redeploy people, because people get satisfaction out of work. This old leisure economy, and we're all going to be sitting around drinking mojitos all day long or something. This is absurd. And as Albert so eloquently pointed out, there is much to be done. So another thing, we're going to need a universal basic income, but I don't think that's the thing to focus on. I'm not going to let people who are disabled or mentally ill or temporarily don't have skills to be able to do anything. We're not going to let them starve. We're going to have a universal basic income, but that's not what I focus on. The other thing is that the big approach to solving this problem of social inequality so far has been the redistribution of wealth. You tax the rich more and you spread out money to everybody else. Well, there may be some of that needed, but how about this for a radical new idea? Why don't we pre-distribute wealth rather than redistributing it? Why don't we change the way the economy works so that people are more directly linked to the economy? This technology can enable that. We can bring 2 billion people into the global financial system overnight with blockchain. We can ensure 70%, right now, 70% of the people in the developing world don't have a valid title to their land. 70% of people in land. You're in Honduras, some dictator comes along, he says, yeah, you may have a piece of paper, owns your farm, but the government computer says, my friend owns your farm. That happened on a mass scale. India, forget it. Most land titles are not enforceable. And Hernando de Soto, the great Latin American economist, says, if you don't have a valid title to your land, then you can't, he says it's more important than being banked. You can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future. You put land titles on a blockchain, and nobody's going to mess with them. Unless you know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Sorry. So, we can do all kinds of other things. We can build a new generation of entrepreneurship. See, because little companies can now have all the capabilities of big companies, increasingly. Blockchain drops transaction costs in an open market, and companies in the future will look more like networks. We could have an IPO with a million people each putting in $1, or 100 million people each putting in 10 cents. That's now possible. So there are all kinds of things that can be done. Musicians can be fairly compensated for the music that they create, as can journalists and artists and scientists and all kinds of other people. If you're a songwriter, the Internet of Information broke our intellectual property rights around music. 35 years ago, you write a hit song, it's platinum, a million singles, you'd get $46,000 in royalties. Today, the equivalent song gets $35. Which will not buy you a mojito in the hotel that I was staying at in Brazil recently. So, Imogen Heap, British singer-songwriter, Grammy winners, putting her song on this blockchain platform. The song's inside a smart contract, and the contract defends her intellectual property rights. You want to listen to the music? Maybe it's free or a few microcents. You want to put it in your movie, that's a different thing. The song asks the movie, or the movie producer, what do you want to do? Background music's going to be theme song, somebody going to sing it. She says, my song acts as a business protecting my rights. We can make a fair economy where people are fairly compensated. Uber and Airbnb, you don't need a $70 billion corporation, Uber, to do what Uber does. That can be done by smart contracts, autonomous agents, on a blockchain so that the owners of cars could be more fairly compensated for the value that they create to the network. So those are 5 of 20 ways that we talk about on how we can create a more direct economy where people are fairly compensated. In that last case, the owners of couches and so on become a true sharing economy, as opposed to what they did sharing economy today, which has nothing to do with sharing. Uber's successful precisely because it doesn't share. You know, it aggregates services. Now, Uber gives a great service, don't get me wrong, but don't call it a sharing company, please. So, theme number 3. I said, this is really bad. I said, I think the Internet's going to bring us together because we'll all have access to the same information. Oops. I said the other thing could happen. You could have a fragmentation of public discourse where we follow our own information, where people make up fake information. We could end up in our own little self-reinforcing echo chambers where the purpose of information is not to inform us, it's to give us comfort. Well, that certainly happened. You look today, what do we got? The old way of informing ourselves has declined. There's no Walter Cronkite anymore. You know, we still have the BBC and some public broadcasting institutions in the world that try and have a reasonable and balanced point of view. Information overload's a big problem. We have this weird thing, a post-fact society. I read an article last week. Apparently this guy has millions of followers, and he says chemotherapy is a terrible thing to do, and it doesn't help you if you have cancer. You're way better off if you buy his herbal products. Now, to me, this is criminal negligence, at minimum, this person has probably resulted in the deaths of all kinds of people. Apparently, 20% of Americans think that vaccinations are a bad idea. At Davos last year, an epidemiologist was telling me we're going to need a new plague to convince people that science is a good idea. So how are we going to solve these problems? Well, I've put forward a few modest proposals in the draft social contract. With blockchain, you can know the provenance of information, so you have a way better chance of knowing what's true and what's not true. But hey, why doesn't every kid in every year of every school in the world have a media literacy course where they develop their BS detectors and where they start to learn about how to function in this whole new world? We all have some personal responsibility to take, too. I'm a chancellor of a university, and every year I tell the graduating students, I want you to read articles. I remember on a panel years ago, I was doing this work about young people, and a smart young woman said to me, if the news is important, it will find me. I don't go and read the news. And I thought at the time, wow, what a cool thing. I now think that that was a terrible thing. I tell young people, don't let the news find you. You find the news. Read articles from beginning to end and develop your own point of view on things. Become a political person in the best sense of the term. And the final one, I said in the book, this whole chapter called The Reinventing of Government and Democracy. I was so excited about how the internet could... Is there anyone here who thinks that the internet has reinvented government and democracy for the better? Okay, 2 people. I mean, in terms of government, we just paved the cow path, right? We automated existing business processes and services. And when it comes to democracy, Houston, we have a problem. There's a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Youth voting is still low. It's had a little bump recently in the US, which is great, but a lot of young people agree with the bumper sticker, don't vote, it only encourages them. And it's kind of funny, except it isn't, really, because democracy is the best model. The United States, government for the people, by the people, of the people. Give me a break. 96% of Americans think there ought to be background checks for firearms, but Congress can't pass a law reflecting the will of 96% of the population. Why? Because they don't act in terms of what the electorate wants them to do. They act in terms of the big funders that put them into power. Well, we have to fix this. And now we've got this crazy polarization that's happening around the world between the left and the right, and the right's really got the upper hand right now. All these populists that can charge up the population with all kinds of untrue statements, and you've all watched the Donald Trump show, which is it's not a funny thing, it's a frightening thing, in my view. So we need to move to a second era of democracy, and this technology can help us do it. In the first era, we created these representative institutions. That was great. It was better than what we had before. But there was a weak public mandate, citizens were inert, and politicians were beholden to powerful interests. We can now create a second era based on transparency, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. You get politicians naked, and if they're going to be naked, they got to get buff, you know, they got to get fit, meaning they have to act with integrity. But there are all kinds of other things that we can do, too. We can have e-voting now with this technology because we solved the double spend problem. Nobody wants to vote in a computer unless you know that your vote's not going to get double spent, right? It's not going to get cast again or moved to somebody else or not counted. Well, you can now have cryptographic proof of what happens to your vote. But that's just the beginning. We could have smart votes inside smart contracts. So think about smart money. You send your kid off to university, you hope he spends, you give him some money, you hope he spends it on books and tuition. You give him smart money. Oh, is that the end? Oh. He goes into the bar, and the money says, sorry, I don't do caipirinhas, you know, I only do books and tuitions. So those are four. This is a good way to wrap it up. Those are four big ones. What do you think? This is a conversation that I'm not going to get to, but it's, how is this going to happen? I don't think it's going to happen from brilliant government leaders deciding to take us forward. It's going to happen through 8 types of multi-stakeholder networks that involve private sector, civil society, some governments, and you. There's a role for each of us to play in making this transformation. We're entering a new paradigm. And you get one of these, you get a leadership crisis. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. And my experience studying this digital thing now for 40 years is that leadership can come from anywhere. And that means it's each of our personal opportunity if we will it. Let's just do this. We get together by the thousands and the millions, and we start to build a global movement for a new understanding and a new social contract in society. Maybe if we do that, this smaller, more networked world that our children inherit will be a better one. And this digital age will be an age where the promise is finally fulfilled. Thank you very much.